Thank you for being here. And I would now like to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Jamie Emery. He's been with Windhorse for over 30 years. Along with myself and Chuck Knapp, he too retired as a director and has been a partner with me in evolving our understanding at Windhorse regarding inclusivity and what that means. So, thank you. And the rest of the folks I'm going to actually read there, because I want to get it right. So this is Adrienne Friedman, next to Jamie, and he has been working with Windhorse for over a year. His passion for this work stems from the aspiration to continually develop himself for the benefit of all beings. He describes himself as an Afro-Atlantic, cisgender gay man who recognizes all identities as ultimately, guess what? Illusory. He is an alumnus of the contemplative psychotherapy program from Naropa University, Graduate School of Counseling Psychology. So thank you for being here. This is Jack Dickey. My mind.
My last name.
I know, you didn't. This is Jack Dickey. I know your last name. He is a third-year graduate student at Naropa's master's program in contemplative psychotherapy and Buddhist psychology. He facilitated a queer conversations group at Windhorse during his practicum placement at Queer Asterisk. He is currently in his internship placement at Whole Connections in Boulder, working with Medicaid-supported clients to provide accessible mental health counseling services. Thanks, Jack. This is Suzanne Pearson. Suzanne graduated from Smith College School of Social Work in August of 2018. She did her first-year internship with Windhorse Community Services, working with individuals as a basic attender and co-facilitating groups within the community programs. And they loved her. Suzanne continued to work at Windhorse Community Services as a basic attender after her internship. She has a history of working in therapeutic communities and residential treatment programs. She unfortunately left us a little while ago, and she's currently a therapist working with homeless and at-risk youth in Denver, Colorado. Thank you. And Soren Thomas. Soren is the founding and executive director of Queer Asterisk in Boulder, Colorado, and it's a Colorado 501c3. Actually, there's three offices, one in Boulder, Longmont, and Denver. Soren is a queer and transgender licensed professional counselor with over a decade of professional experience in the field. Queer Asterisk provides counseling services, educational trainings, and community programming to increase the sense of safety and inclusion felt by queer and transgender individuals and their families. And I'm happy to say that Soren is also a consultant for Windhorse Community Services. So thank you all for being here. And thank you all for being here. So I'm going to begin by saying that the inspiration for creating this panel to explore and converse about the scope of Windhorse inclusivity arose out of our current times that we're living in and the need for more wakeful methods of healing ourselves and extending that healing to others. Also, how can we, as a community of contemplative practitioners, learn and further deepen our commitment to offering this approach to a broader and more inclusive world, bringing greater awareness and voice to people of marginalized locations altogether? The inception of the Windhorse Project, as we know, began in 1981 with the establishment of Maitri Psychological Services. and some of its founding members, including Dr. Ed Podville, Jeff and Molly Fortuna, Kathy Emery, Paul Cashman, Katie Wolf. The aspiration at that time was to be with people who were living with madness in their homes and communities, and surrounding them with a team of contemplative therapists from the Buddhist and Western Psychology program at the Naropa Institute. This initial Windhorse iteration evolved over time into other projects. In Northampton, Windhorse Associates in 1993, Windhorse Community Services, incorporated in 1997, but of course was doing work previously after Ed left. There were two other projects in the United States on the West Coast, San Luis Obispo in 2010, and our friends in Portland, Oregon in 2014. Vienna Windhorse was founded in 1994, followed by projects in Frankenthal, Germany in 2001, and Freiburg, and I'm not sure what year that was. Does anybody know in Freiburg? And then Torino, Italy in 2008. So you're all here representing our work with the people who have long been marginalized because of how they manifest in the world, which is often categorized and deemed differently. So that's been, I think, the greatest movement within the Windhorse Project. The motivation to support people who otherwise are marginalized was the first glimpse within the Windhorse Project to actually bring a mind of inclusivity into the field of mental health care. The Windhorse approach of contemplative care provided the ground for upending the historical ideas, theories, methods, and institutional interventions for people categorized as, quote, mentally ill, unquote. This approach has moved forward in defining and illuminating the marginalization of mental health challenges in all of their complexity and diversity. The contemplative perspective holds a view that brilliant sanity, one's basic goodness, can be found within the chaos of any kind of distress, or what's often called insanity. Within the Windhorse Project, there has been a great deal of attention paid to bringing along the general public in seeing distressed states of mind within the context of inclusivity. In that these marginalized in that these particular marginalized voices are heard, seen, and taken seriously. So at this juncture of our evolution, the question of greater inclusivity is being asked. How can we move beyond primarily serving people with financial resources and find the path forward, serving a greater economic arc, which naturally allows for greater inclusivity in other areas of marginalization to emerge? What are our challenges, and how do we move toward them and find our way through them? So we're going to talk about this. And Jamie will start to look at this notion of our challenges. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie, and hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. And esteemed panel, thank you so much. I just want to give a little bit of an overview here. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Those great words and thoughts and review and inspiration. I want to acknowledge that Anne-Marie and I are just going to check in a bit. We're going to some of these introductory comments, which I'll mention in a moment, and then Suzanne, Jack, and Adrienne are going to dialogue with each other around this topic all together, and it can be specific to Windhorse. It can be specific in a much broader way So we'll find out what they're going to talk about in a few minutes through their dialogue, but specifically related to inclusivity, their own experience within the large topic of inclusivity. Soren will then give us a review or a summary or your own thoughts after hearing the dialogue. Does that sound about right? And that'll be for about 15 minutes or so. And then we'll have questions and dialogue. We'll just open it up all together. So does that sound about right? Okay. Well, let's see. Through this conference, there's some amazing words being spoken. Words have a lot of power. Words have a lot of power to bring together. Words have a lot of power to divide. And I think it's important to have a bit of a context about what the words that we're using and the natural tension that can happen between the different words we use in the day-to-day and the different words and themes that we'll be talking about not quite this evening, this late afternoon. So I just wanted to acknowledge, for example, give a couple examples. There's the phrase mutual recovery that's used quite a bit within Windhorse. Mutual recovery is basically that we're all learning from one another to be supportive, kind to one another, to wake up with each other, and we do this together. So within Windhorse teams, we have different roles, but the fact of the matter is we're all learning all the time. So I just want to kind of paraphrase this discussion with that phrase, and that's going to come up quite a bit throughout this weekend. Another one that's really important also is relational medicine, and that's also very specific to this topic that we're talking about, because relational medicine is basically how we work together, how we heal together, how our friends, our family, staff at Windhorse, clients, our neighbors, people we practice, contemplative practice, whatever the communities may be, there's really an aspect, there can be an aspect of relational medicine. So I just want to put that out there and hold that for a moment. The other definitions, if you will, that I want to just mention here, and then talk a little bit about the tension between these, so first of all, inclusivity. Inclusivity, and this is a broad stroke definitions. Inclusivity is the practice or policy of including people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those with physical or mental disabilities and members of minority groups. Okay, inclusivity. Marginalization. Treatment of a person, group, or concept as insufficient or peripheral. Okay? Diversity. So this is going from broad to the individual. Diversity means understanding that each individual is unique and recognizing our individual differences. These can be along the dimensions of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, physical abilities, religious beliefs, political beliefs, or other ideologies. Okay. Each individual is unique. I have one more definition that I think throws a bit of an issue with all this that we've mentioned so far. There's a phrase called homophily. And homophily basically is the tendency of individuals to associate and bond with similar others. As in the proverb, birds of a feather flock together. Individuals, and this can include age, gender, class, organizational role, and many, many other ways. Individuals in homophilic relationships share common characteristics, beliefs, values, education that make communication and relationship formation easier. The reason so if we just think of these terms, okay, so birds of a feather flock together. Diversity means understanding that each individual is unique. So there's a natural tension that can happen there. The family of origin that we grew up with, where we work, the people we went to school with, were we in the suburbs or were we in the city, sexual orientation and all the rest. Well, evidently there's a tendency for all of us to trend towards people that may look like us, that may think like us, that may have similar socioeconomic background to us, that may have similar education to us, and the list goes on. So you've got this natural tension between what we grow up with and what we are around, classically speaking, and how the world actually is. The world is actually a diverse world. The world actually is not quite where we grew up with. The world there's many different variations on being a human being. People think differently than we do. They look differently. They believe differently. Our bodies work differently. Our sexual preferences are different. So, and many, many others. So I just wanted to acknowledge the situation we're actually working with, and what I want to invite us all to contemplate and to consider is that within this natural tension, there is a experience called fear that can arise. Fear arises when we come face to face, come in the same proximity, quite often, and maybe that's a question. Does this happen to things that are very different than how we perceive ourselves and others? So what I want to acknowledge is that in that moment of actually acknowledging this fear, potential for fear, given these different natural tensions, do we open up or do we close down? And I think we do both. We open up, we close down, we open up, we close down. At some point, we have to make a choice, though. Are we going to continue to explore this, or are we just going to shut down altogether? And I think, bringing it back to Windhorse Community Services, we work with people all the time with extreme, which we say are extreme states of mind. Those of us who don't have extreme states of mind, that's an interesting formation there in and of itself. And so we have to work with this opening and closing when things, certainly when we are coming in contact with things and mental states that are different as we perceive our own. So I just wanted to kind of put some languaging on this issue, because it's an important issue. There are definitely gateways and a path to working with it, and this is why we're here today. Thank you. So, excuse me, to introduce the next wonderful members of our panel, Jack, Suzanne, and Adrienne are here for many different reasons, because they want to be. They're also very generous to be here and share their experiences. They're also, we're not of exactly the same generation. You might have been able to tell. I dye my hair silver, so, not of the same generation. And I think it's important to hear different generations, just simply from my own experience. The issue of inclusivity it's a particular location for any one of us, for example, in the generation we grew up in. And so I think it's really great to be able to hear from you all today.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Okay, there we go. Are you? Okay, great. Thank you. There you go. Everyone here?
Yeah.
Great. So again, my name is Jack, and I'm coming from the Masters of Contemplative Psychotherapy and Buddhist Psychology program here at Naropa University. I'm in my third year of graduate study here. Before we enter into this dialogue, I wanted to bring in some of the locations, like Jamie was speaking to, that I come from. So I do identify as a gay man. My heritage is both Irish and Mexican, though I am passing as white. And my spiritual background is in Lutheran Christianity and Catholicism, but over the last 7 years or so has broadened, I guess you could say, to also include Buddhism as well. And my or try.
Yeah, I am Suzanne Pearson. I guess our social location, we can only say like so many words to really describe it, even though there's so much more based on our experiences. But I am a white, cisgendered woman. I'm pansexual. I'm areligious. I come from a privileged class background. I'm able-bodied, fairly neurotypical. Am I missing anything? Probably. That's a base of where I'm coming from. Oh, and I'm from the Midwest. I feel like that's very important, actually.
And I'm Adrienne. I think I'm also fairly neurotypical, fairly, at times. Emery went over all of the locations. I think the most important thing is how we can talk together coming from different locations, working with the fear that they mentioned. So we're going to do that right now to demonstrate.
Yeah, so one of the first things that I wanted to touch bases on was thinking back to what it is that I could contribute to this panel here coming from my background. And I was thinking about my own experiences here at Naropa, where inclusivity and diversity are considered to be very important aspects of the contemplative counseling model. And I was thinking about what kinds of culture that I encountered here, or cultures that might be created elsewhere that help to foster conversations around inclusivity and diversity. So that's kind of the first thing that I wanted to, I feel like I kind of have to go back and forth here. But that's one of the first things that I really wanted to open up for a discussion is, in both of your experiences, what do you feel like helps these kinds of conversations happen?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is my own fear. Interacting with people, wanting to address things like microaggressions, or wanting to make things clear when we're trying to communicate, and then feeling the actual physical sensation of the gripping in the chest and all of that stops me from being able to talk to someone, to look them in the eye and say what I'm wanting to say. I think that's really where the work starts, on the most basic level, in the very moment. So coming from whatever your contemplative practice is, whatever kind of practice you're doing that's helping you to be aware of that in the moment, I think that's what we should rely most on.
Yeah, I definitely think Windhorse has the strength of bringing that in, of really valuing self-reflection and how you're feeling moment to moment. I think you were talking about so many things I wanted to touch on. But one thing that I've found really helpful for me is just remembering that there will always be misunderstandings in conversation. Like, I used to have this need to be so understood, and I feel like will almost always be misunderstood in some way, and need to just create a norm of being able to go back and repair things as they happen. But yeah, a lot of self-work is necessary at first, because I think people can be really hurt in conversations if people haven't done their own work.
Yeah, and I think that there can be a lot of worry around that hurt, around causing that hurt, or being on the receiving end of that hurt. And so I think one of the things that's really coming to my mind is something that you and I have talked about before, Suzanne, is just a willingness to mess up, that we didn't use the word mess, a willingness to fuck up, honestly, in these conversations, and for them to be messy, and for it to not necessarily go according to plan. Yeah.
That's on that yeah, when there's two people having the dialogue, on the one hand, the willingness to mess up, the willingness to still go there, and then, well, depending on where you are in the power dynamic, because often the issue that comes up is related to power, depending on what the locations are. From the down power side, from the marginalized side, at least in my experience, wanting to keep the white person usually, or keep the person in power somehow safe or feeling okay with what they're doing, can be a barrier as well. So noticing that kind of work is also very, very difficult to do in the moment. So it's interesting, wanting to facilitate these conversations for everyone so that everyone feels capable and not creating shame. Shame was another thing that came up. How to not create shame while also addressing when harm is being done or harm is potentially could be being done.
Yeah, that's, I consider one of the major obstacles to having any kind of dialogue across difference as being shame. Something, I think in some ways our culture has defined these kinds of conversations as being conversations where like you have one chance, and if you mess it up, then you should be ashamed of yourself. So I think one of the major things that's been very helpful for me here at Naropa in my education has been encountering a culture where, what's a good way of putting this? I guess instead of shame, it's a culture of curiosity, of a willingness to open up to someone else's experience and to see that experience as true and to own your own experience as true as well, instead of entering into any kind of shaming or any sense of arguing over what the truth is.
Hopefully, as clinicians in various mental health fields, I feel like that's what we're doing with our clients, with each other, with our coworkers, and just as a person, I think, wanting to create ease of communication across all fields of relationship.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it starts to like infect, maybe infect's not the right word, but all areas of life. Like once you start to notice it, it can really come up anywhere. And earlier you'd mentioned microaggressions, and I was just thinking about the importance of being able to validate everyone's experience as their own experience. Just because with that, like it can be so scary to speak up about things, because a microaggression can seem so small and maybe like not worth talking about, but I think it really is. I think it has a big impact. And like in the Windhorse context on a team, if someone brings up something, then it might like arise something else in other people, so it can create a really rich conversation. I think our teams are a really big strength of Windhorse too, just being able to validate other people, have people you can check in with, and if you can find at least one person you can go to and talk to about your experiences, I think that's so important.
Yeah, and it sounds like being able to express your experience and have it held as your truth, and at the same time, there being a background understanding of these larger systems of power, privilege, oppression, and marginalization that exist both inside of that team model, maybe infect is the right word there, but coming into that team model and existing outside of it as well.
And I would hope from an individual perspective, not just as a clinician, not just as a friend or a relative, but in any sort of relationship, being able to notice what I'm feeling in the moment and work with it, even though it's sort of like becoming an obstacle or a challenge. I feel like the more I'm able to do that, the more we're able to promote that amongst each other, that just creates the ripple effect and makes that culture of acceptance, of curiosity. Yeah, just one person at a time. Or
trust.
All at the same time.
Yeah, and I've heard shame be talked about as a point to like give you awareness that you should be more curious about where that's coming from, which I think is really interesting.
So I know that earlier in the conversation, we also talked about, or Adrienne, you brought in that question of power and how that exists in hierarchical structures, both socially between, for instance, races or between sexual orientations or religious beliefs, but also existing in hierarchical power structures like inside of the Windhorse model. So in that question of power and privilege, I think what was coming up for me is like how the people in up power positions, so like supervisors or therapists, not entirely familiar with exactly what the Windhorse team looks like. So, what's a good way of putting this? How it is that the person or the people holding those up power positions can create or be the tone setters for this kind of conversation to take place.
Yeah, I think all of us should be doing this work, and especially people in power positions, though. When you're talking about an organizational situation, of course, I feel like there's more weight on you guys, on you all. But still, I feel like it's an individual responsibility. It's both, definitely. And in those situations, when you're trying to do that, when it's with someone who has more power, then obviously it's even more difficult to do the work. Yeah. So that's where the onus lies more.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's really interesting to talk about who has power just because of intersectionality of different identities coming together. People may have different levels of privilege and power in different situations. So, and we can assume a lot by looking at people. I think that's what we talk about a little bit here, the internalized bias towards things. And just, yeah, I think there's some stickiness in trying to figure out how to really get to know other people you're working with in your teams. And I don't know, having enough time for that and really getting to be in a comfortable place with that. And yeah, there's just a lot of messiness in there. We all have different levels of privilege and oppression.
And dealing with what was it? We talked about this before. It was the fluidity of each person's expression, the complete fluidity, the complete non-pinned down ability. I just made up a word. But that of each person, I think keeping that in mind can help those situations. Because yeah, you can look at someone, you can assume this and that, and then they can tell you, oh, well, I identify this way, that way. But even within that, just being moment to moment with the fact that this person is a happening, an unfolding, always changing, I think that could be helpful.
Yeah, and that we all have different experiences and we use those experiences to inform how we see things too. I think that adds to all of our complexity.
I know that another question that we had coming up was around this question of bringing conversations of inclusivity into Windhorse, having creating a culture in which these conversations can happen, and simultaneously what Anne-Marie had talked about earlier about creating a different financial arc for the Windhorse services and how that's naturally going to bring into Windhorse services greater representation from people from marginalized locations. And so I feel like there's a real importance to there being a culture set up in which these kinds of conversations can happen, because I think maybe you said this earlier, Suzanne, that this is kind of a culture. It exists on all levels, and so it's not something that's just happening between clinicians or inside of teams, but also from clinician to client as well, and even setting up the tone for clients' interactions with one another as well.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about how if and when Windhorse opens up the accessibility of the program, how that will change with how clients interact with us too. I just recently started working with homeless and at-risk young adults. They have a very different relationship to therapy than the folks we're working with now who can access it a little bit more easily. And if people have been involved in therapy as youth or children versus being able to choose to go into therapy as you're getting older.
How y'all doing?
Doing good?
Yeah.
I'm good. Well, I just want to acknowledge, again, there's a lot of terms: microaggressions, location, power, privilege, phrases, existing, hierarchical within Windhorse. So I wanted to acknowledge that within Windhorse, a team has a team supervisor. Kind of keeps an overview, keeps a lot of contact with the family, the financial aspect, how things are going, this kind of thing. There's the intensive psychotherapist who works specifically with our client. Okay, then there's the team leader who runs the team meetings and kind of makes sure that the day-to-day operations of the team is moving forward. Basic attenders who are doing the shifts. Team leader can also, with the basic attenders, doing shifts, 2-3 hour shifts, 1.5, 2 hour, 3 hour shifts, where they're out in the, they're at home, they're out in the world, and they're basically practicing the relational, a big aspect of the relational medicine of Windhorse. You can have a housemate, have a client around which this mandala has formed around. And what I want to highlight and see what thoughts you all may have is that within the Windhorse structure, there's a clear kind of vertical hierarchy. What I was just talking about. There's the owners of Windhorse. It goes owners. There's the, director. There's a ton of hierarchy in Windhorse, and there is a element where the hierarchy is not vertical, it's horizontal. So, for example, you can be in a team meeting, and in the horizontal hierarchy, anyone can have an insight. We're all equal distanced from the sun, so to speak. So all of us can have an insight. Insight is there for everyone. You can have a housemate that comes in, been there for a month, and say something in a team that's been together for years, and it's just fantastic. It's an insight that we haven't seen. So could you speak a little bit about that back and forth, and where this can open up and where it can close down?
Well, I think that insight is why it's so important to be able to make it so people feel like they can speak freely in team meetings, so people feel like safe to speak up, because we all do have such different perspectives. And sometimes it can be scary, at least I feel like I've been scared before to speak up about certain things, just because I feel like maybe I'm the only person experiencing that one thing, and maybe it's wrong or whatever. And so I think being able to make it more dynamic and inclusive would be great, and like a huge benefit to everyone in that.
I think if someone like you were the supervisor or the team leader on the team, and they could model that to everyone else on the team, that it's okay to show up in a certain way, I think that's what actually helps. I feel like, individually in each team, the circumstances are going to be different, right?
I also just want to note that we're coming to a close on our time ability, and I just want to note that in all of these conversations, there's pretty much never like a clean ending. It's always going to feel unfinished. We're all going to walk away with things that we're chewing on and thinking over, but hopefully this conversation can continue elsewhere with everyone. But we can keep talking for a little bit if people want to. I just wanted to note that.
I just wanted to express gratitude for working with this group of people, and also for the mandala here. This reminds me of being on my tree retreat, and has been actually extremely regulating, so more of this.
Okay, shall we proceed? All right. I'm going to pull up my notes. Hello, everybody. My name is Soren Thomas, as Anne-Marie said, and I'm the executive director of Queer Asterisk, and also a consultant at Windhorse here in Boulder. A few of my social locations: I identify as a white professional, also a citizen of the United States. I am queer and transgender. I'm also a third culture kid raised between countries, and I was trained as a somatic psychotherapist here at Naropa. So one of the things that I feel is unique about Queer Asterisk is that we are more focused on the word queer and less focused on LGBTQ. And from my vantage point, to me, that is moving a little bit away from the comfort and security of identifying with and being drawn to people who are just like us. And in our culture right now, we are expanding the alphabet LGBTQ to include a lot of other letters, a lot of other identities, which is wonderful for everyone who has ever had the experience of feeling marginalized or different. To be in an affinity group with people like you, could be D&D, whatever that is, feels wonderful. And at the same time, it is can be a slippery slope towards or away from being able to communicate across difference. And I feel right now in our political climate that is a crisis, that we are so much more comfortable communicating with people who have the same voice as us and could do better to communicate across difference. So that's why queer, everybody who identifies as something other than the norm, has a space at our organization. There are a lot of similarities between Queer Asterisk, the work that we do, and the work being done at Windhorse. First of all, both of these organizations were born from Naropa University, as myself and my co-director are graduated from Naropa. And also, like Windhorse, we use a therapeutic approach to working with marginalized groups, or threshold dwellers, as I like to call marginalized groups. So there's an emphasis on compassion, self-reflection, brilliant sanity, basic goodness, mindfulness, and contemplative practice. Those are all a lot of words I believe that you all are familiar with. And then as we move forward, there might be some words you're not familiar with, and I'm gonna need you to raise your hand if you want me to slow down. Also at Windhorse, like Windhorse, at Queer Asterisk, we're working within larger systems of privilege and oppression in our local communities and also our respective countries. Who here is not from the US? Yay! I heard mostly European countries. So I grew up in Germany and in Spain. And by third culture kid, I was traveling as a US citizen back and forth between Europe and the US every year and didn't feel I belonged in either country fully, but found my family as the folks who kind of move between countries and between cultures. I consider myself a citizen therapist, someone who practices therapy in a way that addresses public stress. So in addition to working with clients who are experiencing anxiety and depression, neurosis, and psychosis, in my practice, I'm also addressing themes like discrimination in the workplace and in the housing market, bullying in schools, gatekeeping by professionals of medically necessary treatments and healthcare coverage, physical and sexual harassment, violence and abuse, hypervisibility, and profiling as sexually deviant and inappropriate for children. So that's specific to queer and trans community. Every marginalized group has a stigma and a stereotype that they are constantly working to show isn't the whole of them, right? And then also invisibility and microaggressions as invalid, and then of course internalized depression. So it's a long list, but I wanted to share with you all of the things that we're doing and then remind you of all the work that you're doing too. Beyond working with those extreme states, this is also part of all of our work that we're doing because we're working within a larger system. So my entry point into this field of work was my own personal experience as a trans person, which I'm sure is true for many of you in your work with extreme states. Maybe that's not your personal experience, but maybe someone in your family or some experience you had as a young person and wanting to reach out and be of support. I've had to do a lot of work to understand the ways in which I'm privileged as well as oppressed. I've had to assess my social currency and my power. And I always come back to the training I had at Naropa, and many therapists do, that first we should do no harm, and then second or next, do as much good as possible. So we will all cause unintentional harm to our colleagues, our clients, and if we do not check our privilege. The trick is to know it, to minimize unintentional harm, and then to use it to maximize good. For example, I have to understand my white privilege in the context of this country's history and current political climate. And I have to use it to speak up as a transgender person. So there's a sad fact is that I don't feel like I have inherent value as a trans person. It's hard to say. And I know that that is true for other people with marginalized identities, that there's no inherent value in that marginalized identity. So what I've had to do for myself in order to do the work that I am in the world is lean on my privilege as a white person and privilege as someone who grew up professional class. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. So these things, we have to use them. We have to work with them together. Our challenges, our strengths, our privilege, our oppression. We have to be aware and use both of them. You don't have to have a marginalized identity to make a difference, though. So the good news and what we've learned from fourth wave feminism, anyone familiar with fourth wave feminism? Okay, I'm not really all that much either. But I will say this, is that it's not our identity that determines whether we are part of the problem or the solution. Though our identity does inform our formative and day-to-day experiences. We all have the capacity to both interrupt and perpetuate the dominant narrative. What do I mean by the dominant narrative? Every culture has a narrative. From families to community narratives, from national and to national and global narratives. It can sometimes be difficult to understand privilege because it is determined by the most dominant narrative and is not to be equated with hardship. So I'll give you an example. I took a working class job after high school, but I couldn't deny my professional class privilege as someone who had every opportunity to go to college without the effort of going against the grain. So just because I experienced the hardship of a working class job did not mean that I wasn't privileged as someone in the professional class. As a third culture kid, someone who grew up between European and US American culture, traveling back and forth every year until I was 18, difference is not the problem, I can tell you that. It's our relationship to difference, both personally and culturally. In my mind, difference is equated with vibrancy. Though we try to simplify human identity and experience into binaries, we are so much more complex, but not complicated. Binary thinking, straight, gay, cisgender, transgender, polarizes us into groups, one group that is normal and right, the privileged, and another group that is queer or wrong, the marginalized. So first of all, and again, very few people are all privileged or the perfect enemy. And very few people are all marginalized or the perfect victim. That's binary thinking again. Second of all, being straight or one of these privileged identities isn't right. It's just one way of being. And if we can begin to make space for more identities and more experiences to be valid and less threatening, we can begin to approach this notion of inclusivity. Sometimes we think we've reached inclusion and we're just really stuck on integration, which I'll explain. It's certainly better than segregation and exclusion, which I'm sure you all know about from our history in this country. But inclusion means that everyone's experience was considered in the creation of physical space, policies and procedures, and most importantly, since we're social creatures, the community culture. So how do we do this? Consider our experiences of privilege and oppression in the context of the dominant narrative with the intention of first not perpetuating the dominant narrative and then interrupting the dominant narrative to make more space for ourselves or others. We can challenge binary, reductionist, and oppressive thinking that human identity or experience is wrong if it's expansive and complex and does not fit within the margins. And that includes our own internalized oppression. Don't oversimplify, assume, or make complicated human identity and experience. Lastly, we can be gentle with ourselves and others, practice what you already know: compassion and self-reflection, brilliant sanity, basic goodness, mindfulness, and contemplative practice. So with that, I forget if we decided to have you say your closing statements or open it up for everyone. Okay, you've just heard us talking for a long time. We still have a half hour. I'm curious, what are your thoughts? It's time for us. You can come up. I'm going to put this mic up here so you can come up. You can share concerns, thoughts, questions. If you have something specific, we'll answer it. And also, it could open up into a community dialogue. And this is the part that I will moderate and make sure that we leave enough time at the end for Anne-Marie's closing remarks. And if there's stuckness or stillness, I can help fill that, but I won't just yet. What's going on for you all sitting over there? Come get the mic.
So when you guys were talking, I had this really interesting insight that throughout my life I've had the huge privilege of traveling the world. And I realize when I go out into these travels, I relax completely. And it's like the eyes of a child, and everything is open, and I have no sense of us, them, me, this, that. And then so I have a lot to think about, because then when I realize I come home, then there is that different tidal action or flow where you end up, congregating. So it's really interesting. So in some ways I'm a lot less comfortable at home than I am away from home. So anyway, it was just a really cool insight. It was like, I'll have to think about it. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, what that reminds me of is we talk a lot about, I talk a lot about heteronormativity and roadmaps and models. And there is a roadmap for someone who is cisgender and straight and in the dominant narrative, right? We see these people in the news, see these people working at hospitals, someone who looks like me, and we have that roadmap. For someone who's in a marginalized identity, we don't necessarily have that. There's not a lot of people who maybe look like us who are out and visible. And so on the one hand, there can be a lot of creativity afforded to that. Like, whoa, this is completely unknown. I'm traveling in a new country. There's no roadmap for this. At home, I know all the rules. I don't know all the rules when I'm traveling. And there can be a lot of creativity there. At the same time, we need our basic needs met before we can reach that place of creativity. So if you were traveling, looking for a home, looking for your next meal, your experience, my guess, would be very different. And that's just what that reminded me of. Yeah.
Something that reminded me of as well, off of what you said earlier, Soren, is just the vibrancy that is possible when diversity is brought into the space, and how in some ways these roadmaps that you're talking about, Soren, or these ways that the dominant narrative teaches us to live moment to moment, relationship to relationship, actually deaden us in a certain way. They block us off from the vibrancy of life, from the newness of every moment. And so I think that one of the ways that that same vibrancy that you find when you're traveling can be brought here is in an opening up to diversity here, and a disruption of the typical normative narratives that tell us how to live our lives in these spaces. Yeah.
So one thought that came to mind, it would be great to have you all speak to this, is just thinking about the dilemma in doing this kind of work and speaking from personal experience, and then potentially also being in a position of speaking on behalf of an identity and the dilemma of that. And then and kind of mixed in with that is if there becomes a point where you're recognizing that maybe who you're conversing with maybe has some work to do, like how to encourage them or how to recommend that and feeling stuck in that, or just sort of that dilemma aspect. I'd love for there to be discussion.
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to the first part of what I think you're saying, which is the piece of speaking from your own experience, maybe the dilemma there, and speaking on behalf of people. Is that accurate? Okay. So one thing that's true when we're talking about identities and experiences is that we all have these identities and experiences. And so what I'll say I do a lot of work with, around queerness and gender. And what I tell people is that we all have gender identities, we all have sexual orientations, we all have sexualities. And what can bridge oftentimes is getting in touch with knowing those things in yourself and questioning them and exploring them more than someone who is has the privilege of just going through and accepting, yeah, I was socialized a boy, I feel like a man, I've never really thought about my gender, right? So it would be very difficult to speak to the experience of someone who's marginalized, but in order to bridge and have more for the dialogue, if you're able to, gosh, how do I know my gender as a woman? How do I know my gender as a man? And really explore that, you may stumble upon the same questions and some of similar experiences that a trans person is. So a little bit, I don't feel like I answered your full question. And what was the second part of your question again? Holler it.
Yeah, so if you are encountering, so one aspect of this is for us to be doing our own work, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're encountering a situation in which you might be with like a colleague or a friend or whomever, and you're like, man, like there's some blind spots here.
Oh yeah.
How to encourage someone to work without being their educator.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so a lot of these questions, there isn't a right way because it's relationship, it's messy, it's humans. But I could tell you some maybe best practice guidelines that I keep in mind. Generally, we don't want to push people away. So generally, we want to somehow bring people in, and I like to, I end up doing a lot of work, but I really want to get people engaged in the conversation and not feel like they did something wrong. So I might say, here's the intention that I love or what I see you trying to do, and here's what I'm noticing might be missing in order to get you closer to where you want to go. Does that make sense? Generally, I find that people aren't intentionally trying to do harm, that there's some ignorance, there's some, weird perceptions of how the world works, and they can't quite make that connection. And so I try to recognize where the person is going, give them a little bit of kudos for that, and then fill in the missing pieces. Yeah.
I would also say notice yourself and regulate yourself in that moment, because personally, I would want to see how much work I'm willing to do. I don't know if I'd be able to as eloquently, say it the way that Soren did in that moment, working with someone, relating to someone who has work to do, quote unquote. Out of whatever pushes me to want to help them, I would go with that. But then also I can imagine myself personally just getting overwhelmed really quickly and having to calm myself down. So, it just depends on how skillful you are.
Yeah, there's a lot that I feel like I could say about this. I'm just trying to think of what might be most skillful to share. Get messy. Well, in response to your first question, I just think it's important to always keep into mind that when a person from a marginalized location is feeling as if they are needing to represent that location to the dominant narrative, I think that it's important to recognize that as something that the dominant narrative does to people in marginalized locations. Asks them to be representatives of their clan. Or another of my favorite ones is getting really intellectually curious, but not actually communicating or reaching one another on a heart-to-heart level, not opening up on an intellectual level towards the differences that exist, but not opening up emotionally to what's there. In regards to working with somebody that has work to do, like what you were saying, I think in some ways we all have work to do. So I think it's important maybe in those situations, and again, it's so contextual, like Soren was saying, but if this is somebody that you feel as if has work to do on a social justice lens or something like that, or coming into awareness of marginalized and dominant narratives, if you share identities with them, then that's a situation where you could actually bring curiosity and openness from your experience in working with those identities into that space. And one of the ways that, oftentimes people from marginalized locations, they're working with so much stress or emotional tolls from their day-to-day living, from microaggressions and that kind of lifestyle, or living more specifically inside of dominant narratives, that they don't want to be put into a position where they have to educate people from the from the major paradigm about how to have these conversations about what their experiences are. And so there are such a things as like dominant, I don't even know exactly what they're called, but they're almost like ally groups, or groups where individuals who want to do this kind of work but are coming from dominant positions or in society can meet with other people that are sharing those same identities and do the work together instead of asking marginalized persons to shoulder that extra burden as well. So I think in some ways it's a combination of encouraging people to do the work with others that are sharing their identities, and if you share that identity, being a role model. And I think this is one of those situations where it's really important that people that are in positions of power, like for instance within Windhorse, are doing this work and willing to lead these kinds of conversations and to be the tone setters for the space.
let's see, I'm just thinking, and this is a great conversation, and I'm curious if I would love to hear it moved toward the kind of daily work that we do with people in extreme states of mind who are sometimes marginalized groups and sometimes not. And so I'm curious about that. I think of myself as a clinician. I start with, I need to do the work to go to their location. And most of the time, people in extreme states are really stuck in a location. And so as clinicians, we have to work very hard to sometimes, especially when people are in really extreme psychotic states, I have to work as hard as I possibly can to even find a place where they'll let me connect with them. So I would love to hear you all talk about that. So just how this conversation, which I think is really important, and maybe is more speaking to the culture of Windhorse among the staff, but how does that translate when you're working with somebody? And anyway, you get what I'm saying. So thanks.
Anne Marie. Yeah.
Thanks, Jack. Well, I think what can start to happen if we're not willing to enter into and really exchange with wherever the place is that the person is living in, then just like what we're talking about here, not much can happen. And so someone in, and I loved what you said, Jamie, we're calling it extreme states, but who's calling it extreme? Someone who doesn't live in extreme states. And so, from my point of view, whatever anyone is experiencing, if I truly want to connect from the heart and understand who they are and all the locations, even if they land all within the dominant paradigm, I still have to open up to that. And I have to drop my agendas, my ideas of what I think I know about them, and be extremely curious about that tendency in myself. So, in a way, Jack, I think you answered the question, which is, if I'm going to really meet that person, I have to work really hard and go there and find out whatever my challenges are, my obstacles are, to meet them. So whether it's a Windhorse clinician with a so-called Windhorse client, or whether it has to do with being in a circumstance where your own marginalization is being confronted and you have to relate to it in whatever it is. So, this is the work that we've been trained to do, is to actually know ourselves and have a deep, compassionate longing and urge to know other, and then see what happens. Thank you.
Please, anyone else on the panel address this question? Excellent question.
I have something for the group. Who has fears in here and would be willing to come and share one? Fear of getting it wrong, fear of what could I possibly do to have an impact, fear of I'm all alone in my organization and I won't be listened to. And let's get through a couple of those, and then we're gonna, please come up.
But maybe someone wants to speak to what you were saying.
Oh, you were gonna say something different. Please do. No, please do.
Okay, thank you. Hi all,
You'll
thank you so much.
have time to think about your fears.
A little short, yeah. I'm fearful. Thank you all for being here so much. And the previous question segues well into this kind of more amorphous thing I'm wondering about, which is, and Anne-Marie, right? I think you spoke to some of it right now, but I'm wondering for the rest of the panel, how the modalities and things that you've learned in Windhorse, how that influences your vision of the future, maybe queer futures, how that informs like your hope for like collective healing. So it's a broad question, but I think I'm just learning about Windhorse, but I think there's really deep wisdom in the model, and I wonder how you all connect that with your vision for collective healing. Thank you.
The first few things that come to my mind are the encouragement to like really be with yourself when you're with clients, and like I'm always encouraged to think about how I feel before I see someone, when I'm with them, and then when I leave. And I feel like that's really powerful. And the other thing that I think of that's really powerful in Windhorse is just our relationship to one another. And if we can like make it more and more open and inclusive, and people are encouraged to really share where they're coming from, I think we can have even more wisdom come from that. Like, but I think relational psychotherapy is huge. I think it's very necessary, and developing those relationships with people and being able to have conversations that come up with clients and with other staff members is huge. Yeah.
And I think just to add on to that is holding within the relationship the reality of these various social locations, just like holding that in the background. Is that a part of what's showing up here? Is that a part of what's happening between me and the client? Is that a part of how the client is experiencing the world? It doesn't have to be, but it most likely is playing a role in some way. And so how can we bring that into the conversation?
It's interesting that in this model, in similar models, we put a focus on the word relational and mutual recovery, and somehow in my sense of what this work is, just psychotherapy or just healing modalities, helping professionals in general, it's inherently relational, it's inherently mutual. And then specifically with this Windhorse model coming out of Buddhist psychology, it's founded on the idea, or rather on the observation, that we're all literally, we depend on each other to exist. So I'm trying to reach into the community healing that was asked. Focusing, and the fact that we are focusing on calling it mutual recovery, calling it relational therapy, I think that just points to the intention to reach out beyond just healing work, but also just individual spiritual practice, individual self-knowledge on a psychological level, and relating to our friends and our family and society, and doing this work, no matter it's from the social justice lens, from a spiritual lens, from a psychological lens, doing this work as an individual, I envision that if we're all doing it, the ripple effect, it will, and I wrote down a word, an awakened field of influence, I think, is what will result from it if we're all working together consciously. We're all doing this in some way. The more we talk about it, though, the more we call it mutual, call it relational, and make it more known. I think that it's all happening. It's all going to happen. I mean, not just like, oh, it's all going to happen, but I really trust it's all going to that level, to that global level, societal, communal.
I also want to add that I remember as an intern at Windhorse, I had an experience where a client told me something that was really intense, and I was like, oh, how am I supposed to respond? And I talked to my team afterwards, and they're like, well, how would you respond to a friend? Or how do you actually feel? And just really encouraged to bring myself into that space. Whereas, I was a brand new to the field in this way, and so I was like, what am I supposed to do? And I feel like that is not as encouraged here. It's more like, who are you and how are you showing up in this moment? And that's huge.
Do you have some? Please. Yeah, please.
Sorry, it was a little, but I was just, oh, sorry. I had two things I wanted to, or two thoughts, but sort of thoughts, but I was just thinking about, like, being a client of Windhorse Community Services. I feel sometimes that sort of, I feel somewhat separate from the staff, because I'm like, might be viewed, not necessarily by staff, but just maybe viewed with some sort of suspicion as like it being a little like odd at times, and just not, I don't know, just also just, yeah, so just how that, there is not, I mean, I have respect for staff, but I think that they also have some degree of privilege, which is as being thought to be more sane, or just have their like life together or something. This is kind of interesting. But I was also thinking about, I know this kind of, I think this is a wonderful conversation, but I was also thinking about, I don't know, I'm not to distract from what all of you just said, but just how if you're in a team for a long time, you could become attached to some of your team members, and how it's supposed to be like a clinical relationship, but it's just interesting to think about how like, if it's like somewhat organic, it can, it's not necessarily, it's not so easy to just let someone go who's worked with you in a vulnerable state. So I don't know, that's a little different.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds relevant what we're talking about, the separateness of, and it's felt. And that's why we're talking about this is, first of all, we can't, there's some things we can't change, that there is going to be a feeling of separateness between each individual human being, between client and therapist, and then also the work, and what's inspirational here is how do we get even closer and a little bit closer to we're in this together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that staff attempt to not have that sort of gulf between them, but I just was on my mind. Maybe I'm kind of projecting my own. I don't know. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So any last comments? Here's what I want you to do. Think about what scares you most about leaving this room, what you hope to make, how you hope to make a change in yourself, make a change at your organization, and what scares you about doing that. And just hold on to that for just a second, because it's really important to know, to give love to that feeling. Be gentle with yourself. And then Anne-Marie is going to give us a challenge.
Well, let's start with an invitation. You know, one of the things that we do at Windhorse is that we meet regularly as organizations. We call it the World Council, and there's 2 of them happening already. And we meet and we talk and support each other, love each other, just have a whole continuity of care, as we say. So I guess what I'd like to propose as an invitation, and it could be a challenge, what would it be like, you know, over the last few years at Windhorse Community Services, we've created what's called the Inclusivity Council, or actually committee. And it's comprised of the social work students that come. Usually we have a couple a year. I've been involved with it, and there's been other staff that have come in and out of that meeting. And it's been an amazing opportunity for all of us to gather and just talk about these experiences that come under the the umbrella of inclusivity. My phone just talked to me. So I'm wondering if each of the Windhorse, all right, Eugenie, if each of the Windhorse organizations, both in the States and in Europe, would consider creating an Inclusivity Council and meeting together to look at whatever the issues are within your own culture, your own world. And then we could have representatives from each of those committees, just like we do at the World Council, meeting together on a regular basis to discuss these things. Because, you know, my own experience is that we think about this, it's in our lives in different ways, but Windhorse, the Windhorse projects I've been involved with are so, in many ways, busy doing the work that we do, that this kind of goes on the back burner. And it might pop up every so often, and then it goes back on the burner. So maybe we can make a commitment going forward that we really will engage this as a genuine addition to enrich our lives. So anyway, from my point of view, at Windhorse, we made history today. I think this is the first panel on inclusivity we've ever had at any Windhorse conference. And you're all brilliant, and thank you so much. And you're all brilliant, and thank you so much.